Well, to kick off tonight's program, I'd like to introduce the moderator for this evening, the founding executive director of the museum's Exponential Center, Marguerite Gong Hancock. I'm just 2 months here, and part of the reason why I am here is because of Marguerite's program. And since launching the center in June of 2016, I was here for that event, Marguerite has led the team in capturing the legacy of entrepreneurship through artifact collection, education, discussion guides, and oral histories with visionaries in Silicon Valley and from around the world. Prior to joining the museum, Marguerite worked at Stanford University for 20 years, where she co-led a variety of programs on entrepreneurship and co-directed the executive education programs and co-edited 3 books. And so let's welcome Marguerite to the stage. Great.
Well, good evening and welcome. I'd like to add my welcome to Daniel's. So tonight's event continues Exponential's focus on women in tech, as well as our venture capital initiative. And as part of our venture capital initiative, we're capturing this history as well as telling the stories and impact of venture capitalists and their special relationship with entrepreneurs. Here's a short video, thanks to our Exponential team, that illustrates some of the people and companies that are already involved in our work.
I sit here and listen to the smartest people on earth tell me what the future is going to be.
Venture capital is really exploratory drilling. You find the great oil field and you follow the field.
Bob called me and said they wanted to do it, and I said, I'm in.
It is rather nebulous on what we were going to do.
I called Chuck and Frank. I said, I think I've got the next really big thing here.
It would be an understatement to say the product sold well.
Don said something like, in this economy, if a customer would like to give you money, I recommend you take it.
It was a Pyrrhic victory.
I really believe that you have to learn to just keep getting back up again. And if you do that, one of those times, somebody actually won't keep pushing you down.
When I look back at a long life, a wonderful life, I only regret the times I said no.
Thank you. We're really excited to let you know that we are starting something here, a very special focus on venture capital, and I'd like to highlight 3 of the things that were shown in that video. First, thanks to our curatorial and collections team, we've brought out of our storage 5 special business plans that are related to tonight's conversation of founders and funders. In 1946, just 5 weeks after unveiling the ENIAC, Eckert and Mauchly created the first instance of a business plan to commercially sell computers. That's the first business plan there. The result was the UNIVAC 1 just a handful of years later. Also, there are 4 other business plans for Digital Equipment Corporation, Apple Computer, the original Macintosh, and Sun, along with the products there in the company. So collecting is a very important part of what we have here. Secondly, drawing on our unique collections as well as our community, we are trying to support new research and insights and publication. And so I'm very pleased to announce that Sebastian Mallaby, a noted journalist previously at The Economist and Washington Post, and an award-winning book author, has accepted the offer to be our first Exponential Distinguished Scholar. And he'll be here affiliated with us during the coming year as he works on his book on the history of venture capital. So we're really delighted to welcome Sebastian, who's here tonight from London. And last but not least, of course, Exponential is very focused on inspiring and informing the next generation of entrepreneurs. And we have 3 different groups of students, university students who are here in the audience. So a big shout out to each of you. They're here from across the state as well as the country. I hear there's some people here from Tennessee. Is that right? So hope you enjoy the program. And now I'd like to introduce our amazing speakers tonight through our tradition of using 5 numbers. First of all, 60,000 is the number of taskers earning money on the TaskRabbit platform. 44 is the number of cities in the US and Europe that TaskRabbit expanded to. 3, 14, 18 was the date that Shine Together was launched, a platform to celebrate the impact that women have every day. 2017, the year that TaskRabbit was acquired by IKEA. And 12, the number of investments made as general partner at Fuel Capital over the past 12 months. Leah Busque is the general partner at Fuel Capital, where she invests in early stage companies across consumer, hardware, education, marketplaces, and retail. Prior to this, of course, she was the founder and CEO of TaskRabbit. Please join me in welcoming Leah to the stage. Glad to have you here, Leah. Next, 5 numbers. 500 billion, the number of dollars managed by Floodgate. 5 million, the dollar valuation of Lyft when she made the investment in that company. 6, the number of weeks postpartum that she defended her PhD thesis. 12, the number of years in venture capital. And 0.5%, the rate of investments made on the emails and pitches that she receives. Ann Miura-Ko is a co-founder and partner of Floodgate. She's been called the most powerful woman in startups by Forbes and is the 3rd highest ranked venture capitalist on the woman venture capitalist on the Midas List this year. She also, of course, teaches entrepreneurship at the Stanford University. So please join me in welcoming Ann Miura-Ko. Great to have you here, Ann. Please sit down. Well, it's great to have you here. Welcome to the Computer History Museum, to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So would love to start with your background and what it was in your early years that kind of sowed the seeds of you getting involved with tech and entrepreneurship. Let's start with you, Ann.
Yeah, so I grew up actually right here in Silicon Valley. I was in 5th grade, I moved to Palo Alto. Before that, I was in Fremont, California. My dad worked over at NASA Ames Research Center for over 30 years. And when I was babysitting in 5th grade, the guy I was babysitting for was a serial entrepreneur. And in high school at Pali High, I was going over to a student's house to teach her how to debate. I was on the captain of the debate team. And it turned out it was Steve Jobs' daughter. So I ran into Steve Jobs at the house. I was like, why are you here? And I'm like, oh, it's your house. So it was sort of steeped in that kind of entrepreneurship, technology. And I think the seminal moment for me was I always knew I was going to be in STEM. So when I got to college, I majored in electrical engineering, but initially I thought I was going to be a doctor. I realized that I wasn't nearly empathetic enough, and I didn't like sick people. And so I decided I had to find another calling. And it was at that moment, actually, I had been working as part of the work study at Yale. You have to work, I think it was like 10 hours a week or something. And I chose to work in the office of the Dean of Engineering. The other choice was actually refilling formaldehyde in biology labs. So that was the easy choice.
Easy choice.
I chose right. Yeah. And then, and in one of those, as I was working in this office, I was asked to give the tour of the engineering department to a guest. And I didn't know who it was, but I was giving this tour to this guest. And he started talking to me. He said, well, where do you live? I said, I live in Palo Alto. He said, are you going back home for spring break? I said, in fact, I am. And he said, well, how would you like to see what I do for a living? And I was totally naive. I turned to him, I said, well, what do you do for a living? And he said, well, I'm the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. This is Lou Platt. And I remember just thinking to myself, this is so weird, but yes, I'd love to come see what you do for a living. What was incredible was it was 2 weeks, completely changed my life because I wasn't interested in business at the time. And he opened my eyes to this world of business, just like an incredible gentleman, CEO, just of the long lineage of Hewlett-Packard. And at the end, I get back to my dorm. And in that week, they had a .NET announcement with Bill Gates. And so Bill Gates had come in. And I never got to interact with Bill Gates. But at one point, Lou had asked me to come into his office. And there were photographers. So he's like, sit here and we'll take your picture. And when I got back to my dorm, he had sent me 2 pictures. He said, thank you so much for coming to visit. I thought you would enjoy these 2 pictures. And one was I'm sitting on this couch talking to Lou Platt. And the second picture was Bill Gates had actually sat exactly in that same spot, talking to Lou Platt that same day. And it was like this first moment where, I mean, he didn't say it, but I was like, I can be Bill Gates. It's like, that's what I'm meant to be. And this was when he was on top of the world. And I remember I told my parents this, and they were like, why don't you go work for Hewlett-Packard? And I remember just thinking, well, like there's so much out there in the world that I don't know, and it sparked this curiosity for me, which I think was really inspirational. It still inspires me to think about what mentorship is.
It's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing that. How about you, Leah? Where does your story begin? On the other side of the coast, the other part of the country?
It does, yeah. My story begins on the East Coast. I grew up in the Boston area, about an hour outside of the city, in a tiny town called Shirley, Massachusetts, population 4,000. There was no stoplight in town. K through 8 was in one building. It was just really, really tiny, really rural. My father was in the Air Force. He was a civilian, and he worked at Hancock Air Force Base, where he worked for over 30 years. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. Really no exposure at all to entrepreneurship or computers or anything like that. But in high school, I started dating this young man, who's now my husband, who was really into computers. And we would spend Friday nights building computers. We would spend the weekends going to computer flea markets and buying motherboards and connecting systems, and that was what we did for fun in high school. So I was a computer nerd, but only because the guy I was sort of dating, was into it. And I was also really into the arts and the creative side and ballet. And so when I went to college, I thought, I'm going to go find a school where I can major in dance. Like, it wasn't even in my realm to focus on math or computer science. Math was always something that I loved. My general nature was I loved STEM, I loved math. And so when I got to college, Sweetbriar College, a small women's college in Virginia, to major in dance, I started taking math courses. And I decided, I think I'll major in math and major in dance as well. And then as part of the requirements, I had to take C++ programming. And as soon as I realized that there was a platform where I could take all of these ideas and all these creative things that were bouncing around in my head and actually code them and build them and not rely on anyone else to do that for me, that for me was what clicked. And so I kind of swapped everything. I ended up majoring in math and computer science, and I did this little dance minor on the side because it was fun. And after college, I was able to get a job as a programmer. And so I started at a small company called Iris Associates, which was Ray Ozzy's company, who went on to found Groove and work at Microsoft. And we were the original developers of Lotus Notes and Domino.
That's great.
And so that was an incredible experience because I got to step into a legacy code base that had been around, for a decade or more at that point, and really go deep and really learn about a full technology stack. And at the time, we were still burning CDs and packaging software and shipping them around the globe. And so what else it taught me was a lot about code integrity and how to ensure that code that I wrote that day and checked into the platform that day would not only build in the release room that morning, but a customer wouldn't touch what I did for 18 months. And so it had to be right, it had to be good. And I loved that about programming. And so I ended up spending 8 years at IBM. IBM bought Lotus, and we all got merged into IBM. And this was in the Boston office in Cambridge. And, to be honest, about 5 years in, I started to get antsy. I started to feel like I love technology, I love programming, I love building software that millions of people are using around the globe every day. But I also feel like I have all the other skills that I'm not really using on a daily basis. And so in February of 2008 is when I had the idea for TaskRabbit. And I ended up quitting my job at IBM 4 months later to build the first version of that site.
Perfect. So let's fast forward to that moment and talk about what brought you together, where your stories converge. And this is a special relationship between these two people because there are many investors that invest in a lot of entrepreneurs, and there are entrepreneurs that have a lot of different investors. But it happens to be that this pair was the ones that took their bet on each other first. What I mean by that is that Ann was a new VC. And of all the deals that she was looking at, the first entrepreneur that she chose to invest in was Leah. And Leah had some angel investing and some others, but the first institutional venture capital came from Ann. So this is now a 10-year journey. And so I'd like to go back to that, and let's go back to February, the story of TaskRabbit that brought you together. And how did the idea come to you? When did you decide to make it a company? Tell us that.
So my husband and I, Kevin, were living in Boston at the time, and it was February of 2008. I remember it was February because it was cold and snowing outside. And my husband and I were getting ready to go out to dinner when we realized we were out of dog food. And we always had these really geeky conversations in the house. And that night the conversation turned into, wouldn't it be nice if there was just a place online we could go, say we needed dog food, name the price we're willing to pay. We were certain that there was someone in our own neighborhood that would be willing to help us out, maybe even someone at the store at that very second, and it was just a matter of connecting with them. Sounds very simple today, but 10 years ago, this was not a concept that was prevalent. No one was jumping in strangers' cars to share rides. You would be insane to do that in 2008.
Or sleep in strangers' homes.
Invite someone into your home. That would be crazy. There was no app store. The iPhone had come out 4 months earlier. Facebook was just breaking out of the college scene. It was really early days. But for me, as an engineer, I got really passionate about these emerging technologies, social, location, and mobile. And I realized that I could combine them to connect real people in the real world to get real things done. And then it became in real time. And so 4 months later, I quit my job at IBM. I built the first version of the site, got it launched in Boston. And then a really incredible mentor who we both know, Scott Griffith, who at the time was the CEO of Zipcar, he was letting me work out of his office. He mentioned this program that Facebook was running in the summer of 2009 called FB Fund. And it was an incubator program. And he thought, hey, you're building on the Facebook platform. You're one of the first companies ever to do that. Why don't you go out to the Bay Area and participate in the program and check it out? I had never set foot on the West Coast in my life. I was 28 years old and had never flown across the country. Like a very East Coast girl, okay? And I was like, well, I mean,
Were you in shock?
Honestly, I stepped off the plane and I took a taxi, I think, or the Caltrain to Palo Alto. And I got out in Palo Alto downtown and I was like, what is that smell? Are those trees? is that eucalyptus in the air? Like, what is this place? I don't understand. I vividly remember that feeling, just like this is a completely different world. And so I got connected to Ann from an advisor, and it's a longer story, but it was Tim Ferriss who ended up connecting us.
From the 4-hour work week?
Tim from the 4-hour work week. I hustled my way into getting him as an advisor into the company, and then he connected me to Ann and said, you know, I know you want to raise a seed round of funding. This was at the end of the Facebook Fund Incubator program. You should meet Ann. And so we met for breakfast.
So why Ann? Why had you considered other alternative forms of funding, and then why of all the venture investors did he suggest Ann?
Well, so he suggested other people too. Ann was on the list, yeah. There's also Steve Anderson at Baseline, who also invested, and a few others. And being part of that incubator program, there was a big demo day. I mean, there was a lot of interest. There were angel investors, there were other institutional investors that I was meeting with, and I didn't know how to raise money. I didn't know how to do anything really, but it was a nice boot camp. It was a nice 12-week boot camp, basically, that kind of teed me up to get that seed round of funding done. And so at the end of that program in October of 2009, I just ran a process, and I said, I'm going to go out and get $1 million raised to really build this company. And at that point, I realized I wanted to build the company here in the Bay Area for a lot of different reasons. And so Tim connected me with Ann.
Okay, Ann, so we just saw that you only invested in 0.5%. Do you remember that day that you met? Where were you? Kind of recreate that. And do you remember kind of the pitch that Leah made? What was it that intrigued you as you were looking at the idea?
Well, so at the point that I meet Leah, I've been actually working at Floodgate. So I co-founded Floodgate in May of 2008. And I had sort of this conscious thing where I didn't really want to make investments myself. I followed around my partner, Mike Maples, for about a year. And I would advise different companies. I even found some that I was really interested in, but I would make Mike sort of take it. And he would take the board seat. He would lead the investment.
Actually, let's just dial a little bit back and say, how did you get involved with Mike and Floodgate? What was that process of changing from a PhD student into a venture capitalist?
Yeah, so after college, actually, I worked for a few years, and one of my jobs was actually as an associate at a venture capital firm, Charles River Ventures on the East Coast. But my second day of work was 9/11. And I really actually enjoyed working there and sort of seeing venture in a real downturn. I thought it was just very interesting. And the benefit for me was I knew I was going back to grad school. And so I had applied to a PhD program at Stanford and gotten in for math modeling and computer security, the operations research department. And partially I'd done that because I wanted to be a founder. And I knew that I wanted to be a technical founder. And I figured that in security, the problems keep coming up. And so the timing of my PhD actually wouldn't matter. And it was in an area of research that I thought was just developing. And it turned out I was right. When I arrived at Stanford, this area was not an area that had any conferences. I had full funding, and so I could pick my professor. But I remember there are people in the computer security group that would say, you know, if you have a computer security problem, it's a technology problem, it's not a risk problem. And they told me that my research wasn't headed down a good path. I think like what I learned from that was you can actually be entrepreneurial even in academics. I actually refused to take the qualifying exams that they had designed for most of the PhD students, and I designed my own. I then constructed my own reading and dissertation committee to basically serve the purpose that I wanted to have it serve. And I designed it so that I would be able to do the things that I wanted to do. And then in the midst of that, I felt like I was ready to go and start my own company. And one of my advisors said, you know, you've been in academia for 4 years now, and you need to go out and see what's in the real world. And so his suggestion was that I find an angel investor and just see what their deal flow looked like. And so as I'm constructing this business in my head, I went and asked a bunch of angel investors if I could sit in with them, and Mike Maples was nice enough to say sure. And we would have these meetings, we called them unpartners meetings, because venture capital firms have partners meetings and we were not partners. And we would invite other angels, and we'd invite all of these companies to come and pitch for us. And it was at this point that I realized the venture had suddenly changed. And I knew it through the eyes of my students, because you know, it was this sudden moment in 2007 really where you actually had cloud services really emerging. You had really robust open source software. You had actually commoditized hardware. And all of these things were becoming a reality. And so these people, these entrepreneurs, no longer had to raise $5 million and sell 50% of their company. And Mike was pitching 500,000 is the new 5 million, and that really resonated for me. And so I could see why people only needed $500,000, maybe $1 million. And as we're looking at these companies, Mike actually ends up raising a small fund. And he had been angel investing for some time, but at one point he called me and he said, hey, you know, Ann, we've been working together on these partner meetings for a few months now, but now I've accidentally raised a fund and I really want a co-founder. And I think I have a great idea. You should drop out of your PhD program. And this isn't a venture-backed startup like you want to do, but now it's a backed venture startup. Let's go. And I remember I'm in this car, I'm driving up to Tahoe, and I'm like, this guy's crazy. Like, he wants to start a venture capital firm. And back then, like now, it seems like very natural. Everyone does it. But back then, it was unheard of. And I remember going back to my advisors and my mentors, and they would say, why don't you go and be an associate at like an actual real name venture firm, like one that people have heard of, because no one's heard of this Maples Investments. And, but I think it's sort of what entrepreneurs like Leah feel, right? It's like you see this opportunity, and now it's 2008, so the crash is happening. Mm-hmm. And my mother is freaking out because she's like, as far as I'm concerned, venture capital is a financial institution, and there is a financial crisis happening. And you spent 4 or 5 years now on this research, and you're throwing it all away. And so in May, I got started with Mike. Just immediately fell in love with not only the opportunity that we were pursuing, but also working with this incredible guy who gave me incredible opportunities to do the things that I wanted to do. And seeing that there was truly an opportunity to make these investments. But the truth of the matter was I was a PhD candidate. I had like no track record. I was sort of flying by the seat of my pants and trying to create a story for why people should take money from me. But I couldn't really construct a great reason why they should take money from me versus these great other investors. And so it was just sort of this hustle. And I remember one of my mentors actually said, you know, Ann, you should really finish this PhD too. It's going to give you immense credibility. And so it was a struggle. This time period was from 2009 to 2010 when I was 2008 to 2009 when I was hunting for the Leahs of the world. I was also finishing up my PhD by waking up at 4:30 in the morning every day. I had a 1.5-year-old daughter at the time. I then soon became pregnant with my second child, to which my mom was like, you are crazy. And then I said I was going to defend my thesis. That's where I defended 6-week postpartum. And then I found Leah. And like, that to me was, you know, I kind of knew she was talking to other people, but I remember I'd spent this year just looking at a bunch of companies. And when you know, you just kind of know. No one had talked about sharing economy. And here's this young, vivacious, energetic little woman.
It's true.
And she's like sitting across from me, eating breakfast, and she is just jamming on this idea. And I just fell in love hard with this idea, with this woman who's across the table from me. And I remember I emerged from Peninsula Creamery and I was like, I am going to win this investment. And I'm like, Mike is not going to make this investment. This is mine. And then I'm calling all these people. I'm calling Tim Ferriss and I'm like, do not let her meet with one other person. He's like, I don't know if I can do that. And then I'm like, maybe she should meet with all these people I know. And I was teaching with Steve Blank. So I was like, please, Steve Blank, meet with Leah. Tell her how amazing I am. And then like I said, Leah should meet with Eric Ries. And then I was like, Eric, tell her that I'm just like the most amazing investor you've ever met. And all these people just were like super nice about it. And
they did. Yeah.
They would like, they had no information to go on based on that, but they would say these things for me. But I remember being super paranoid and just wanting it so much and chasing Leah down and basically begging her to take my money. And then she fortunately did.
So let's hear your side of the story.
Yeah.
Did it feel that way?
It's funny because I remember the email you sent me. So we had breakfast at the creamery. It was such an engaging conversation. So at that point, I had particularly met with a lot of investors on the East Coast in the Boston area. And then I came out, did the incubator program, and had met a bunch of angels and other investors on the West Coast as well. But when I sat down with Ann, like something clicked, right? Like that feeling was mutual. She really understood my vision for the business. And we went back and forth. I mean, I remember it was like 90 minutes to 2 hours. We were sitting there going back and forth about this company. I hadn't had any other meetings like that. And so I left the meeting feeling like, oh my God, I hope I can get her, you know? And I remember the email she sent me just a few hours later. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a sentence I remember vividly that was like, I haven't stopped thinking about this idea since we left. Usually that's a good sign. And I don't know if you know this story, but a few years later, John Zimmer at Lyft forwarded me an email from you that had the same sentence in it. And I said to John at that moment, she's in. And he's like, how do you know? And I said, because she wrote that same sentence to me. And so that's just kind of a funny aside. But it's true.
It's my giveaway.
Yeah, everybody knows now. They get an email
for that line.
That sentence. So, but yeah, I mean, she had connected me with amazing people who vouched for her and were amazing references for her. And so I was really excited about working with Ann, the shared vision there. And you know, she talked a little bit about her technical background. I mean, that resonated with me. As a young female technical entrepreneur, to me, a female venture capitalist that was a computer science major too, like that resonated. And of course I wanted to work with her, you know? So,
yeah, it was like two like very unusual animals came together and were like, I recognize you.
At a terrible time. I mean, in 2009, this was an awful time to raise money, by the way. And so, yeah, it was just a mix, I think, of a lot of unique circumstances that brought us together.
And the Peninsula Creamery.
Oh. And Peninsula Creamery.
At Stanford Shopping Center, too, not the one.
The old school one, OG, yeah.
The old school one.
Yeah.
I've had many meals there. So let's now go to the company started. You have your funding. Now comes time to start to execute. You're building your team. What were some of the early sort of challenges that you were working on, and how did it work to have Ann as your investor?
I mean, one thing I remember early on, so we set up a board at that point. We got together every 4 weeks or so. Ann was so helpful in the beginning about helping me figure out what to measure, how to measure it, and then how to be really disciplined about what the milestones were. What is the path forward? How do we take this seed, scale the company into a Series A? What does the company need to look like at that point? How do we back into it? Like, what are the KPIs? And because of her analytical background, you know, she was able to help drive those discussions and really, I think, help create a really solid foundation that then permeated throughout the culture of the company from the beginning. Like, TaskRabbit was always very metrics driven, very fiscally responsible, really focused on unit economics. And yes, I'm an engineer and I love math as well, but that also was driven from Ann in the early days, which was fantastic.
So Ann, as you're looking at new company, new founder, what were you seeing that were sort of that glimmers of the jewels that you were saying, well, let's fan that part of the flame? What were the things that you really saw as the upside potential? This is uncharted territory, as you said, right?
I mean, I think so. First of all, the sharing economy isn't named. It's sort of this idea. And first of all, Leah, as you can tell already, is an incredible storyteller. And she was trying to figure out how to tell this story, not only to investors and to technologists and the engineers she was trying to hire, but to the regular person who was using the service. And she would come back to these board meetings with incredible stories of people connecting. Mm-hmm. And I think the one that stays with me even to this day is there was a young man who had ended up in the hospital. They suddenly discovered he had cancer. Mm-hmm. And his mother wanted him to have some food in the hospital that wasn't hospital food. Mm-hmm. And so she posts this job on TaskRabbit asking someone to bring her son food at the hospital, and who picks it up but another mother. And I still tear up even thinking about this, but mm-hmm. I remember Leah telling the story, and she's saying, I think we're redefining a neighborhood. Like, this is what people in a neighborhood used to do. Mm-hmm. But now you're connecting a woman, I think she was in California, with another mother in Boston, mm-hmm. to service one another and create an incredible in-person connection. And I remember just like knowing that was special and trying to help empower Leah to be able to tell that story, and then figure out from that, like, clearly there's a customer market fit there, and there's a product market fit there. How do we then fan that? How do we grow that? How do we create even more connections?
I'd like to talk about that aspect. As you start to grow, you went from Boston to other cities and started to have this challenge of going beyond what your original team could do. Talk about your team, and then how did that then build into scaling with your customers as well as the other taskers?
Yeah, I mean, there was a huge learning curve, right? I mean, I came out of IBM as an engineer. I didn't feel like an entrepreneur. I didn't really think that I was starting a company, let alone one of the first companies in the sharing economy. Like, it all had come together at the time. So there's lots to learn. I had great mentors like Scott Griffith at Zipcar. I had sat in the Zipcar office for a year for free. Thank you, Scott. And I got to see him be a CEO. And so that was good training, too, to understand what does a big company, what does a big organization look like? How does he manage? How does he inspire, and how does he hire? And how does he work through the tough things too? How do you let people go when it's not working, when you're not scaling? And so, we built, I think, hands down, one of the most incredible teams over the years. Jamie, who's here tonight, ran marketing at TaskRabbit for 6+ years and did an incredible job storytelling. and getting our messages out there and creating a brand and a community around our mission and our vision. Stacy, of course, who came in as COO and worked alongside me for 4 years before we promoted her to CEO. I mean, just incredible. And in fact, you know, I'm very self-aware about what I don't know. I think I have a pretty good handle about what I'm good at, and then I'm okay and have zero ego about the things I don't know how to do. Bringing people around the table that can fill in those gaps, that have an aligned vision and aligned passion for the mission of what you're building was really important. And that goes the same with investors. Bringing in someone like Ann in the beginning who really had that aligned vision and knew, she had seen how to build and scale a venture-backed company. Those were the skill sets that I needed. And so, you know, Stacy was another one. 9 years at Google. It took me 2 years to recruit her out of Google. I was relentless. And she finally joined and helped change the trajectory of this company, and continues to just kill it today through the acquisition to IKEA, right? So, yeah, team is just incredibly important. And of course, there's a lot of learnings and a lot of misfires and a lot of adjustments you have to make along the way. The people, you know, usually that you bring in on day one are not going to be the same people when you're 50 people, 100 people, 200 people. It just doesn't usually scale that way. And so you have to be willing to always do what's best for the business and always, you know, take care of people as well and figure out how to balance those two things at all times.
One thing I see that's common about you both is that you have these sort of audacious goals and you're relentless in pursuing them. It's true, right? So just tenacity and pursuit. So you have talked about sort of BHAGs, these, you know, big, hairy, audacious goals. And what was one of the ones that you set out for you at TaskRabbit? And did you make it?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in having big, hairy, audacious goals. And to the point where I have a vision of what these audacious goals look like. I feel like if you have a goal in your mind and you're almost afraid to share it with people because it's so embarrassing, it's so fanatical, it's like you want to shove it away in the closet, like that is the type of goal you should have. And so as a side note, when I was at IBM, I remember vividly a moment where I was told I was too ambitious. And I thought, that's weird. Like, I thought ambition was a good thing. Like, I don't understand, is this negative feedback or are we celebrating ambition? It was very confusing. But I realized at that moment that not everyone is ambitious. Not everyone has big, hairy, audacious goals. But I knew that someday, if I started a company, if I did my own thing, I would always inspire my team to think big. And so I remember one brainstorming session, Jamie was there, she's shaking her head. We did Post-it notes all over this whiteboard, and I was really pushing people, like, think big. What's like the craziest idea you could put up here that's gonna make us all laugh hysterically? Like, the goal is to make everyone else in the room think you are insane. And so one of the goals that someone put up, and it was a woman in member services, you know, just individual contributor doing really well at the company. She put up, when President Obama posts a task on TaskRabbit, we know we will have made it. And it was like 2010 or 11, probably 2010. And so we all laughed. We thought it was hilarious. We're like, that's great. That would be so funny.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. 3 years later, we're at the White House. We're presenting to President Obama and his team about how the TaskRabbit technology and platform that we built could be used in times of disaster relief, in times of recovery, and connecting volunteers, and providing services in a community that really needs it. And so that was an amazing moment because we all recognized that 3 years earlier, you know, we had put that goal up on the board. Now, President Obama himself did not post the task, just to be clear. Many people on his senior advisory team did, and we always joked, you know, maybe 8 years after the presidency, he could make an extra money doing tasks on TaskRabbit. Who knows? We still have goals. But it was an amazing moment, and we did take the time to recognize that as, wow, we connect the the dots back. And I think what I realized is have the big, hairy, audacious goals, but also set the baby steps to get there. You have to think in bite-sized pieces as well and really connect the dots. And today, as a founder, the one thing you might need to do is like take out the trash, like just something that feels so menial, so nothing, no impact. That's okay. Every day you have to think about what can I do in the next 24 hours to push the company forward. And tomorrow it might be presenting to President Obama, right? But on a daily basis, what is it that you can do to move even an inch further and closer to that goal?
Great story. So Ann, as you're watching and working with entrepreneurs and founders that have these audacious goals, how do you really help them hack value and create both growing and sustainable value?
Yeah, I think, so having been with Floodgate now since 2008, we've seen a lot of different types of companies grow up in this market, and the market has changed drastically. One of the things that we've noted is that just kind of like the same way that there's fake news, we believe that there's the same thing as fake growth. And too often, our entrepreneurs get really caught up in the news cycle of what growth is. And we're trying to help pull our entrepreneurs back and give them a little bit of time and a little bit of breathing room so that they can have real growth, that the revenue that they're claiming isn't subprime revenue, that what they're able to do is build a sustainable business that's real. And for us, what we found is that there's this period where we say you have to hack value. That means you're going from absolutely nothing, an idea in your head, and now you have to prove the existence of this company, which is you have to prove that you provide value to someone out there, that someone deeply cares about what you're producing. And then from there, that singular value, now you have to use the least amount of energy to produce the most amount of revenue that you possibly can. And most of the time, I think, even in Silicon Valley, people are forgetting the least amount of energy portion. They're consuming a ton of capital. They're just trying to grow their business at all costs. And we're trying to introduce this notion of discipline and what is it that allows your company to go from 0 to 1 and then 1 to X. And then and only then should you choose a path of blitz scaling with massive amounts of capital, or potentially even just growing your business profitably with a small amount of capital. And we found that in working with so many entrepreneurs over 10 years that we've learned a lot of these lessons. We have the scar tissue of fake growth. We have the scar tissue of people not balancing cash burn with the amount of growth that they have. And so what we found is that over time, that scar tissue is actually quite valuable. And we're able to translate that knowledge to some of the people that we're working with today.
Thank you. Speaking of scar tissue, we've talked so far about a lot of wins and the up and to the right. How about a dark moment? Every entrepreneur, every investor, every one of us personally has times when things are dark. Things are looking difficult. It seems overwhelming. Leah, can you share an example, a specific story, a moment during TaskRabbit time when you were in your dark moment?
Of course, there were many. I mean, it is like a roller coaster ride. I think one thing I had to learn pretty early on, and I eventually got good at, is I didn't ride the roller coaster. I didn't celebrate the highest of highs, and I didn't go down to the lowest of lows. I just figured out how to stay level, because at any given moment, we could be, closing a new investor and something really exciting could be happening. We could be on the Today Show, and then 10 minutes later, there could just be crises and, fires that needed to be put out. And so learning how to just be level and acknowledge those moments on both sides, but not over-dramatize them, I think was an important skill and lesson to learn. You know, one of the moments that was really tough is when we made the transition to the new product.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
That's what I was
I mean, that was a big undertaking. So, quick context, I launched the site in 2008, 2009. I built it as a web platform based off the eBay marketplace model. Then the sharing economy comes in 2010, 2011. Then all of a sudden, on demand and these mobile first apps start up in 2012, 2013. By 2013, 2014, we're realizing like, whoa, I think we might have missed the boat on mobile. And this on-demand thing is really complicated, but it's kind of table stakes now for the end user, for the consumer. Like, what are we gonna do about that? And so there were a lot of tough board meetings, there were a lot of tough board discussions, and what we decided to do was take a brand new product, mobile first, launch it in London, launch it in an international market where no one had ever heard of us before, and test it. This was very controversial. You know, some people thought that we were too distracted and we were gonna go open a new country with a new product and like, what are we thinking? We're still a small team. I'm so glad we did that in hindsight because the product in London worked great. When we decided to transition it back to the US, millions of customers, 50,000 taskers, it was a complete disaster. I mean, it was really, really hard. It took not only just a product and technology overhaul and we kind of ripped out all the tech and we put in this London product, but then we also had to retrain and re-operationalize all of our tasker community and get them up and running, and the pricing, the on-demand nature, everything changed overnight. And it was really, really hard. And the NPS, the Net Promoter Score, the satisfaction of both sides of the marketplace just negative, dived. It was awful. It was a really scary time. But we knew internally that we had made the right decision because we saw the product work in London and we realized that we just needed to ride out this baggage, this history that we had with this customer base that was used to things working a certain way, and we were gonna have to really work through the transition with them, sort of hand in hand, side by side. And so we had our eye on the end goal of continuing with the transition, which meant bringing in new customers and recruiting new taskers. And, you know, Stacy was really helpful at this pivotal moment because she had seen a same sort of pattern happen when the new Gmail interface was launched at Google. Everyone hated it, and everyone was up in arms. And so she would get up at our Monday morning stand-up with the team, and everyone is like really distraught, and we're all looking at the numbers, and she's like, guys, this is normal. It's gonna be okay. I've seen it happen before. We're gonna come out of this trough. And guess what we did? We came out better and stronger, and the team was better, and the customer base was better, and the revenue was better and growing faster. But it was a really scary time. And I mean, honestly, I'm glad I went into it without actually realizing how much heavy lifting and how much hard work that was gonna be. Like, I don't know if I could do that again. It was hard. And I don't know, I'd be curious to hear like your side of that moment from an investor board perspective.
Yeah. So I appreciate, you know, a lot of people in Silicon Valley now talk about the pivot and like you change a button color and like that's a pivot.
Yeah, it's not a pivot.
And I think like what Leah is describing is a pivot, right?
Yeah. This was like 5 or 6 years in.
Yeah, it's like blood, sweat, and tears, and literal tears.
Literal blood too.
Yeah.
Honestly. Yeah.
It's just like, it's messy. And usually it's a controversial decision, especially internally, because let's be honest, like to be a founder, you really believe in that vision. You're making something literally out of nothing. Mm. And if you didn't believe it, you wouldn't have built it. And now you're being asked by the market, by the customers, by your intuition to sort of flip things around. And you have maybe one piece of grounding. So Leah had London as her grounding. She's saying, I know this is going to work. But the whole time, people are saying, but all this code that you wrote, remember all those sleepless nights? Remember those birthday parties you didn't go to, or those social events you gave up on because you were working on this code base? And you're throwing that away. You're throwing away something that you know. And your employees are up in arms around it. And so to witness that from an investor perspective or board member perspective, that's just really, it's hard because you're not sure that you're going to come out on the other side okay. But it was also a decision that you could see needed to be made. And what I loved about both what Leah and Stacy would show is they would show the cohort analysis. You guys would show every time, look at this new crew of customers.
Yeah.
They're sticking with us a lot longer. It is a better set of customers. And from that experience, I really learned this concept, and I've been talking about it with a lot of our other entrepreneurs, this concept of the most valuable customer. And what Leah was showing was she was accumulating more valuable customers over time, and that's what gave me confidence. And you can fire your bad customers. And in many ways, there was an accumulation of bad customers. And how courageous is it to actually fire some of your customers midway through building your company? Mm-hmm. I was really, inspired by the courage of that. I think not everyone does it. Not everyone makes that hard decision. But she was very careful to justify it. And she and Stacy were very diligent about showing it on a very consistent basis.
Love that concept, firing your customers. We are happy to see the incredible impact TaskRabbit grew across so many markets, acquired by IKEA, and then you made the jump to become a venture capitalist yourself. Mm-hmm. So if you could share with us, who was the first person you made your bet on and why?
So first I have to say, a real inspiration for what I'm doing now is this woman right here. Like, when I thought about who do I want to be when I grow up, it's Ann.
This old hag.
So there's that, right? Watching her, I feel like we sort of grew up together in these different paths, and I got to see her as an investor develop over time as well, and it's just been an incredible journey. So I feel very fortunate to have had that role model. And then I'm really excited about what I'm doing now at Fuel Capital. So one of my first bets actually is our two female founders out of New York City building a flexible job marketplace. So right up my alley, future of work, marketplaces, really incredible female founders. And their story and their vision really resonated with me from the beginning, and that was the first bet I made.
Great, thank you. And Ann, now you're 10 years in, you're a seasoned, what did you call yourself, old cat?
Old hag.
Oh.
Hag.
Oh.
Yeah, she said hag.
Oh, hag. Can you share, when you're looking at entrepreneurs who are pitching to, whether it's at the Creamery or somewhere else, what are you really looking at? What's your mental model that you're looking at to evaluate who you're going to invest in now?
So we have this idea we call the prime mover these days, which I've been really thinking a lot about. The prime mover to us is not just someone who's really agile. And I think the lean startup movement was really big when I was just getting started. Eric Ries was starting to blog. Steve Blank is someone I've taught with. And so I was really into experimentation, and I felt like over the last few years, experimentation's been taken way to the extreme, and I see students, like, they don't even know what they're doing. They're just trying to experiment their way to a great outcome. And it just doesn't happen that way, right? You have to actually have an intuition for where things go. And so I'm looking for founders who marry that concept of real strategic rigor, which is what we used to have when it took you 2 years to build a product with lots of software and hardware and technical risk. You knew that there was a customer on the other side because you'd studied it. So I love that kind of strategic rigor where you've taken the time to think about this market. Is this the market that matters? How big is it? Is it audacious enough? Do I have these BHAGs for this market? And then finding the entrepreneur who can actually experiment and be agile within that environment. And that's what we call a prime mover. And we're excited to try to find those.
In your relationship, because this founder-funder relationship is something that you're repeating now again and again, was there a time when you had a disagreement? There's this sort of metaphor of friction that can either create fire, going with our metaphor tonight in a very positive way, or it can also just create kind of crash and burn. Can you talk about what that dynamic is like when there is a difference of opinion in a real, like, solid way? And then what did you do to make that a positive or productive outcome?
I can't actually remember ever having like a all-out fight with Leah or like a real strong disagreement. I think for us, like Leah's a truth seeker, right? And I'm a truth seeker. And so we have mutual respect for the truth. And what that means is as long as she's seeking truth and I'm seeking truth, we can have an honest discussion about things. And it doesn't feel like a disagreement. It's a debate, right? Is this the right metric to be looking at? You know, is this the way the product should work? What does the flow have to look like? Why does it look like that? And if I'm asking questions, it's not from the perspective of, Leah, you're wrong, but rather, I just want to understand it. And Leah is also in the same position of, I want to understand this too. And so, to me, functional relationships are about that. It's about curiosity and respect for one another's curiosity as well. And so the disagreements I think we had would be more, I don't understand this, can you explain it to me? And you know, actually, our attorney, Andre Garkanian, so if you're ever starting a company, Silicon Legal's the way to go. He's the very best. I've been working with him since 2008, so is Leah. But Andre's been in those boardrooms, and I don't think he's heard us having.
Wouldn't it be funny to get Andre's feedback on that? Andre, have you ever
did
seen
we ever fight? He said vehemently.
Yeah.
But in the nicest of ways.
Yeah, that's right.
Truth-seeking way.
Yeah. I mean, yes. So I think when you invested, I remember you saying, like, if we're not disagreeing and debating, like, then, like, why are we both here, right? We have to make this company better, and we can make each other better, right? And so we absolutely share that philosophy. I mean, one of the great company debates over the years for TaskRabbit is we started so broad, like you could get anything done on TaskRabbit. Remember those debates? And then the debate was like, should it be one vertical? Should it be one category? Should we just do one thing? You know, the iPhone is the remote control for your life. Should you just be able to say, like, get me a handyman, get my dry cleaning done? Why would you go to a platform to do everything? And so those were strategic, you know, debates that happened all the time at the boardroom, but were really, really helpful to the company. And, you know, where we netted out is we ended up honing in on a category around home services and then really developing the messaging and the user experience around that category. So it wasn't a single category and it wasn't everything, but it certainly helped, I think, get the right customers, get the new cohorts right. And those, I think, were the types of conversations that were really helpful.
Great. We're going to now add in questions from our audience. And the first one actually is for both of you about the number of women VC partners and founders. What's the state of it now, and what are you doing, if anything, about it? And this is a perfect opportunity if you want to talk about All Rise and then Shine together.
So there's a group of about 35 female venture capitalists that were getting together for breakfast on a regular basis. And at one point, the founder of Cowboy Ventures, Aileen Lee, sent out a note, I think last July, just as all of this sort of stuff was happening with binary capital and Uber, and it felt like there were consequences suddenly, like an entire venture capital firm got shut down because of sexual harassment. And And so Aileen was saying, should we mobilize? Should we do something to create change, like real positive change in the environment, and not just complain about it? And so there were a few dinners and all of a sudden a few initiatives. So the first initiative was the female founder office hours, where now literally like hundreds of female founders are getting mentored by female venture capitalists. We also have female founders also mentoring other female founders, and they're getting coaching on not only seed round of financing, but all the way through growth round of financing. We also have an initiative called Founders for Change, where now over 800 founders have voiced the fact that they're committed to diversity and inclusion, not only internally within their business, but in their boardroom, and that when given the choice, they will seek venture investors who have diverse partnerships. And this includes very well-known founders. And what I'm particularly proud of is because there's over 800 such founders, I think we can get to 1,000 pretty soon. And I think with that, now we can appeal to the capitalist sensibilities, the greed of the venture capital firms, and create some sense that if you don't actually start to create diversity, not only is it just bad for business, because you shouldn't be sitting around a partnership saying, yeah, that business where it's, the consumers, 50% of the population, bunch of women, I'm gonna go ask my wife what she thinks about this business, even though my wife is not part of the partnership. You need to have that firsthand experience. You need to have more perspectives around the table. And that works for people of color as well. And I think just having lots of different diverse viewpoints is becoming increasingly important. And the founders are demanding it. And if you believe that we are going to see founders coming from all corners of the earth, which just has to be true, right? Then you have to have a partnership that's starting to represent that. And so I'm excited about the change that we're seeing. Just this week, there were something like 4 female general partners that were announced for many firms. Mm-hmm. And that's just the start. Like, we actually know of many more that have not been announced who have already been hired. We believe that there's a lot more who are in the interview process. We're doing dinners to actually help these women get through that interview process and have an added advantage. But you're seeing women band together in a real incredible sisterhood to make it a possibility. And I think, this cycle that you see with Leah of, I was just sort of a young venture capitalist, some guy actually took a chance on me so we would have 50-50 gender neutral partnership. And then I found a female founder that I could invest in, and a number of years later, she's now investing in the next generation of founders, and that's what creates that cycle. And I think we're just seeing the start of it. I'm really excited.
It's very exciting. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Leah, you also you have your own initiative. Tell us about your view on this and what you're doing to impact change.
Yeah, so, I think at that moment last summer where everything sort of came to a head, there were a lot of different initiatives that fell out of it. And one of the areas that I became really passionate about and excited about, along with Jamie Vigiano here, my co-founder, was just being able to amplify and support the stories of everyday women doing incredible things. And for us, I think building a crowdsourced marketplace with 50, 60,000 taskers across the US and in London, we had this global view on the world. And that we wanted to be able to create a platform that told the stories beyond tech and look for everyday women doing incredible things in all corners of the earth and really give them a way to amplify their voices. So we were deeply inspired specifically by the work of a senior advisor to President Obama named Valerie Jarrett. And Jamie and I had read this story online about how in President Obama's administration that Valerie and the senior members of the cabinet who were women had made this pact with each other that they would go into meetings if they felt like one of their ideas was being talked over or overpowered by some of the other people in the room, that they would help amplify. They would give credit to the idea, amplify the idea, and around and around and around until it was so obvious that that idea was that person's idea and that they should talk about it, that it would happen. And so this concept was called shine theory. And it was really exemplified by Valerie in President Obama's administration. And so Jamie and I were talking, we were brainstorming, we were thinking, it wouldn't be great if we could amplify voices for women everywhere. How can we take this concept of shine theory and really make it into a technology platform that scales? This is what we do, right? And so we hustled our way into getting Valerie on the phone. And Jamie and I kind of pitched her this concept, got her feedback. She immediately on the spot said, I want to do everything I can to help. And so we have her story posted on shinetogether.us. We have the Olympic gymnast Nastia Lukin as well. We have Ann's story on the site, Selena Tabakawala, and others in the queue. Everyone from academia to military wives to other entrepreneurs. And so it's really just meant to be a platform that celebrates and amplifies the voices of women everywhere.
Fantastic. And I think you brought some cards. If any of you are interested in learning more about Shine Together, there's information on the tables outside.
And Valerie Jarrett is on the board of Lyft.
Just as an aside.
Just as an aside.
All these connections, yeah.
Connections. This network is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So several of these questions really ask for advice. We have people who are looking for, what advice do you have for me as a young entrepreneur? What should I do first if I'm looking to start my company? If I want to follow in your footsteps in 5 years, what could I do? So I'd like to close this evening conversation by asking, so if you were to boil down your experience that you've had, you've been on this 10-year journey together, you're now paying it forward with your leadership for other companies, other founders. What one word of advice would you give? And then could you tell us a story or a moment that led to that sort of being an aha moment, or why you would want to pay that forward? Let's start with you, please.
Sure.
Leah.
To distill it down, my one piece of advice would be an uncomfortable amount of hustle. And what I mean by that is there were so many moments, and one in particular, the story of meeting Tim Ferriss, who connected me to Ann, was all hustle. I had no connections, no network here in Silicon Valley. I had heard that Tim had been invited to the incubator program at Facebook, and I could sign up for a 15-minute time slot with him, office hours, 15 minutes, and to get his feedback on the product. And so I signed up for a slot, but at the time I was in Boston. I wasn't in Silicon Valley. I was going back and forth. And bootstrapping the company, hadn't raised a lot of money, and it was a $700 plane ticket to get back out for 15 minutes with Tim Ferriss. And I thought, all right, if I'm going to spend this money, if I'm going to put it on the credit card, I am going to turn this $700 into $1 million seed round of funding. That is the only way that this makes sense to me. And I just put that in my head. And then I met Tim for 15 minutes. I asked him for another meeting. We met over lunch. It was an hour lunch in person. It was supposed to be a phone call, but I told him I was going to be in the area. And I just hustled, right? I just hustled my way in, met him over lunch. And after that lunch is when he said, I need to introduce you to Ann. And that's how I got to Ann. And so that $700 plane ticket that went on the credit card turned into that $1 million funding from Ann, and it was just a lot of hustle in an uncomfortable way. I mean, out of my comfort zone.
That's great. Do you want to show your?
That is my word, hustle.
Okay, thank you. Fantastic story. I think that $700 investment paid off. You
I think so too. I'm glad. Okay. Glad I maxed out that credit card.
Ann, show us your word and tell us your story, please.
Mine is a thunder lizard. Thunder lizard, and this one's a particularly cute one I drew, is inspired by Godzilla, and this is a story that my partner Mike likes to tell. You know, we think of entrepreneurs as people who are born from radioactive atomic eggs. So their DNA is fundamentally different. Then they swim across the Pacific Ocean, and depending on whether Mike is telling the story or I am, you either land in Tokyo or you land in San Francisco. And you start to eat buildings and cars and trains, and you shoot laser beams out of your mouth. And you are wreaking havoc on the industry that you have invaded. And these thunder lizards are incredibly audacious because they aren't here just to make a small footprint. They're here to make a large imprint, to change things fundamentally, to not just start a business, but to start a movement. And I am inspired every day by the thunder lizards that we get to fund and get to work with, because I see that. I see that inspiration. I see sort of what they turn into, the kind of impact that they have in the world. And if we get to have a small piece of that every day, it's a great day.
That is a great day. Well, from your beginnings in Shirley, Massachusetts, and Palo Alto, California, thank you for telling us your story of what's brought you to your connection and building TaskRabbit and this 10-year relationship now that's now paying it forward and impacting not only great funders and other founders, but also women and others. So thank you so much for telling us hustle and thunder lizards. It's been a pleasure to have you here at the Computer Museum.
Thank you.